from about 35 metres, chips it in, it's high, it's a goal. 2 goals straight.
Really enjoying the movement up on the forward line. Peter Road goes wide. Grinter behind this time. Oh, he got to the front. That's a top mark.
One-hander in the end.
That's what we're talking about. He has got skill. Look at this. Wanted the front posse. Eye on the footy, both of them. Morwood hanging on.
Right. How did that stick? Oh, great effort, wasn't it?
Well, Rod Grinter has kicked 1 already. And he's kicked 2. And Melbourne are 4 goals to nothing.
Up they go. It's a loose ball. It's with Melbourne. Tingay shuffles it out. Stretch. Tingay looking for a hand pass. He gives it out wide. Here's a chance for Rodney Grinter on the left foot. And he slams it right through the middle, and he's a happy man.
A happy man indeed. Our guest tonight is a cult hero of the club and one of the most feared players of his generation. He rose up through the ranks, winning a premiership with the thirds, a best and fairest with the seconds, where he would go on and captain later in his career. He played 134 games with the seniors and kicked 57 goals. He was made a life member of the club in 1994. Welcome to the Demonland podcast, Rodney Grinter.
Good on you, Andy. Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Rod, first things first, where did the nickname Balls come from? I know you still use it today. And can we call you Balls in this interview?
All my best friends call me Balls, so you're more than welcome to call me Balls. It's certainly a name that anytime it's mentioned, I know the person quite well. It was given to me by Paul O'Brien and Scotty Sutcliffe going back to 1982 pre-season. I was down doing a pre-season as a young fella, and they were doing some work in the Melbourne Footy Club change rooms. They were both carpenters. So the footy club said, can you go over and give them a hand? They're working at the MCG. And I said, yeah, that's fine, no worries. So I got introduced to them as obviously Rodney Grinter from Katandra, and these guys were playing senior footy at the time. And there was training on that night, and all the senior players started to come in. And during work, I obviously called them Paul and Scotty, and they'd forgotten my name. And during work, they were calling each other knackers and cock and balls, come and do this, and cock, can you go and do that, or whatever. And anyway, all the senior players started to turn up for training. So there was, Robbie Flower and Shane Zantuck and Peter Moore and all, Peter Giles, all these legends of the footy club. And they just said, g'day Obi, g'day Scotty, how you going? Who's your mate? And they just said, that's Balls. And that's how I got introduced to these guys from the first time. And it stuck from there.
Love it.
Balls, as you mentioned, you came up through the ranks of the thirds and then the seconds. Did that apprenticeship at the club help foster the love that you have for the Demons today? Because we don't have that system anymore. There's not really that sort of academy that we had in the old days, is there?
No, Jace, you're quite right. It was certainly something that there was a group of us from the zone. It was zone back then, so we weren't drafted. There was an area that was zoned to the Melbourne Footy Club, and the Melbourne Footy Club could invite people from that zone to train and then put them on the list. So there was a group of boys from the Shepparton or the Golden Valley region that came down together and played in a successful team in the under-19s in 1983. Winning a flag, and a lot of those guys stayed around, not just from the Golden Valley, but from the under-19s team, and progressed through to the reserves and seniors, and was the catalyst, I think, behind that early success in the mid '80s of the Melbourne Footy Club. That we all grew up together from the under-19s, and we're all a big family. And I think that camaraderie and closeness gelled us well together to play senior footy, and with some, Todd Viney's and the like coming across from Adelaide, and Earl Spalding and Warren Dean from Perth, added to what was a really close knit group of boys.
Who were some of those players that you went through the system, through the under-19s and the reserves, players who who alongside you finally tasted some of that final success.
Yeah, there was Greg Healy, Graham Yates, Stephen Newport, Stephen O'Dwyer. Stephen O'Dwyer didn't play in the under-19s grand final, but he was certainly there very early on, right from the start. Brett Bailey was amongst that group in the under-19s. So there was a good core group that Paul Payne from the Golden Valley, Paul McCarty. There was a good Shane Ward. Just trying to remember back then, but it was a good tight group of guys.
Yep, some pretty good names among that. Balls, you earned your keep as a defender for the most part, but we noticed while researching this interview that you actually booted 5 goals against Carlton in just your 3rd game. Did you prefer playing forward or back? Because you spent quite a bit of time up forward, obviously, later in your career.
Yeah, I started forward, and it's pretty tough in the forward line. If you're not kicking a couple of goals each week, you certainly find yourself back in the twos, which happened to me in my first couple of years. I was in and out of the team. Played 11 games in my first year and 11 in the seconds, and then the second year again in '86 another 11 in the seconds and 11 in the seniors. So I really found my niche when Greg Wells put me on a halfback flank in the reserves, really rebounding off that halfback flank and driving forward, and then obviously got promoted up to play on the halfback flank in the seniors and did quite well, and really for the next sort of 4 or 5 years I was halfback flanker.
You mentioned Straubs earlier. We spoke to him a few weeks ago and his tribunal record came up and we noted that he was 8th on the list of most suspended Ds. He knew that we were interviewing you in the coming weeks and he made sure to remind us who was number 1 on the list. You fronted the tribunal 10 times for a staggering 31 matches suspended. Did John Northey or anyone else ever tell you to pull your head in, or was the club happy for you to play what these days would be called unsociable football?
Yeah, well, I was really rapt to hear your introduction to the podcast tonight, to highlight some of the highlights that didn't have me being knocking someone over or getting reported. But look, it always obviously comes up.
Yeah.
Getting reported 10 times and for 31 matches, I was found guilty 7 times out of those 10, and every time I went up, I always seemed to get not just 1 or 2. It was always 3, 4 or 5, and there was one particular game for 2 reports that I got 9 weeks, which certainly nothing to be proud of, but I think it was just one of those things that whenever I got into strife, there was I think a mandate at the AFL to try and get me out of the game, because it was rough and tumble back then. It was the way that we played, and if blokes got in my way, well, I'd knocked them over, and sometimes it was a little bit too high, and copped a report. So, at the end of the day, in relation to your question whether the footy club supported me, no, they would certainly prefer me to be playing and rather than not playing, but it wasn't ever discussed in a manner that I needed. Greg Wells did say to me a couple of times in terms of the way that I approached a tackle. I had this round arm habit of tackling blokes, and he said, you need to sort of get that out of your game, or you're going to hurt someone or really badly, or you'll hurt yourself. But in terms of trying to cut that out, I think that was just part of my game. I couldn't play footy really any other way. It was just the way that I was brought up.
We won't dwell on the tribunal stuff, Balls, but obviously the Terry Wallace incident tends to get probably brought up the most in connection to that. It was the first case referred to trial by video. How do you reckon you'd go in today's game, given the way things have gone in terms of attacking the man?
Yeah, I think everything's graded now, so it's all ticking boxes. So The Terry Wallace one was certainly high. Was it intentional? Well, that would get argued. I to this day say that it was never my intention to coat hanger him, if you like, in the old term. And I referred to Greg Wells talking to me about my my round arm tackles and so forth. That I will end up hurting someone and also potentially hurting myself. And that happened that day. I missed the ball by a whisker and followed through with that round arm action and copped him high. I ended up getting 20 odd stitches in my hand due to his teeth going through the webbing between my thumb and forefinger, and ended up in hospital for a week due to that getting infected, which was unfortunate. Unfortunately for Terry, did some damage to his teeth.
You played with some of the greats of the club, Robbie Flower, Jim Stynes, Gary Lyon, and my personal favourite, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗲. Who was the most talented of the bunch?
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, I would say, in terms of just exceptional skills and ability to be able to kick goals, whether it be left or right foot. But in terms of football, Robbie Flower was just amazing for the size of the man, the way that he played, not only for the Melbourne Footy Club, but I got vivid memories of him playing for Victoria, and the way that he did his thing out in the field was amazing. Jimmy, for his pure courage and stamina to be able to back up for 244 games in a row is pretty incredible. There were times that we had to, I was put on Jimmy to do a fitness test a couple of times during that period to see whether, he was able to get out. And there was Danny Hughes and I remember one night at training at the Junction Oval, John Northey said, we need you two to go over and test Jimmy out to make sure that he could, he's right to play, that he's not just playing to try and keep this record going. And he pulled through with flying colours, and he was amazing. And obviously Gary, well, he was my second captain. Robbie Flower was my first, then Greg Healy, and then Gary. But he is an outstanding centre-half forward, full forward, and legend of our footy club.
Balls, you mentioned Jimmy Stynes. You were on the mark that infamous day out at Waverley during the 87 preliminary final. What do you recall of that incident and the disappointment of that afternoon?
Yeah, look, it's very, very clear in my mind. It's been spoken about a lot. Last year it was replayed a lot when Melbourne made the finals for the first time in a long while, and Hawthorn were in the finals. So it's, the game itself, I recall it. We were doing very well for 3 quarters. We kicked with a win in the first quarter. The wind changed, and we were kicking with it in the second. The wind changed in the third. We were kicking with it. So everything was going our way. And then the tide just seemed to turn in the start of that last quarter, and there was 3 or 4 goals that we'd missed that we should never have missed. And if we had have got one of those, we wouldn't. This situation with me and Gary wouldn't have even been spoken about, really. But yeah, I was playing forward that day, and the runner came out, and Stephen Newport was doing a good job on Gary Buckenara on the ball, and Buckenara went forward. So the runner came out and said that you're going back to play on Bucky for the last 20 minutes. Went down and picked him up, and a couple of goals that we'd attempted didn't get there, and the last one, they had obviously a game plan of being late in the game, 5 points down. They went straight down the middle. Ball went over the back. Quick handball off. I think it was 𝗟𝗏𝘃𝗁 and Buckenara led, and I tripped on his feet and fell into his back just as the ball was coming. But he ended up he marked the footy, but I fell into his back. So it was a free kick, and I was standing right on the 50-metre line. The crowd was amazing. The noise was unreal. So when he'd taken the mark, or the free kick was given, the siren was sounding, but nobody could hear it. The umpires couldn't hear it. and Robert 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 was running free around the boundary side of the ground on his own into the 50, and Jimmy was coming from the middle of the ground. So he just went directly to pick up Jimmy. And if he had heard the siren, there would have been no need for him to worry about it. But we didn't. And, yeah, he ran between me and 𝗍𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗁 and got the 15-metre penalty, which 𝗍𝗀𝘀𝘁 then just slotted it through.
Do you reckon, and I think I've thought about this a lot, do you reckon he would have kicked it from outside 50?
Well, I think that extra 15 metres would have been an extra pressure on him to kick it that little bit further. So whether his accuracy would have been the same from a 35 or 40 metre kick versus a 55 metre kick, we'll never know.
Yeah.
And he says, I've spoken to him a couple of times at functions where we've been asked that question, and he says, well, we'll never know. And when he's talking to Melbourne people, he always says he would have.
Just to make us feel better.
Kicked it either way. But yeah, you just don't know. Yeah. That extra pressure for that extra distance may have made a difference.
Balls, you played in the 88 grand final, which we ultimately lost by a record margin at the time. Did you rate us a chance going into that game, or were the Hawks just too good that season?
In retrospect, obviously at the time, yes, we were up and about. 87 was unfortunate what happened. We won the 87 night premiership. So we learned from what happened in 87 in the prelim, and we're all hungry, and to get through to the grand final was an amazing experience. I was 23, I think, at the time, and we had a group. We didn't have a talent like that talented of a group, but we were a very tight group. So there was not a lot of champs in our group. And then you looked at Hawthorn, and Hawthorn had champions on every line. And it was just unfortunate for the Melbourne Footy Club and for me and us that were playing that day that we came up against an unbelievable Hawthorn team. And yeah, watching the game, I don't think, even though it was a record margin at the time, I've watched it. I've watched the replay of the game, and we didn't play that badly, but to be beaten by 80 odd points or whatever it was obviously a shellacking. But it was a great experience, and obviously very, very disappointing to finish the way that we did.
Balls, after you hung up the boots at Melbourne, after a stint in Tassie, you eventually returned to Katandra West, where it all began for you, and you won a premiership there. That must have been very satisfying.
Yeah, it was terrific to get the call to go back and play where I grew up, which is when I was a young kid growing up. All I wanted to do was play footy with the Katandra First, and the senior players at the time were my heroes when I was growing up. The the VFL back then was just something that we watched on the telly on a Saturday night on the replay, and it was like miles and miles. It was that far away. It wasn't in reach for me. All I wanted to do was play senior footy with Katandra, and I actually did that before I left Katandra to come down to Melbourne. I played 2 years with the Katandra seniors without winning a premiership, but to go back and play with these kids that were kids when I left. So David Teague, who's the current Carlton coach, played in that premiership team with me. He was 17.
Right.
And to go back and do that was it was very special. It was great.
I saw on when I was doing some research for this interview. Are you cousins with David Teague?
Yeah, that's right. My mother's maiden name is Teague. So David's father and my mother are cousins. So we are related.
All right, great. You were also the D's runner for a number of years, and given your first-hand knowledge of the importance of getting messages out to players, what are your thoughts on the new rules limiting the amount of time that runners can be on the field?
Yeah, I don't like it, and I think it's one of those things now. I think that because they've decided from a viewing the game and seeing people running around on the ground, it's not a good look having a runner out there. But if you can set up all your plans and during the week and prior to the game saying, you're going to be rotating off here and you're going to be doing this and yada, yada, yada. So that gets drilled into the players, I'm sure. But what doesn't get drilled into the players is that if our key forward gets injured and comes off and that rotation doesn't happen, or our key back or an on-baller gets injured and doesn't come on, there's no message that can be run out straight away to say that you're playing here and you're playing there and you go here. It's I personally think that it should be brought back. Limit the amount of times the runner can go out there, but don't make it just on when they score a goal, because sometimes there might be 8 goals scored in a game, and that's not enough time to get out to help coach your players.
Balls, we've just got a couple last questions for you. We're extremely grateful for your time tonight. What do you make of the current team and how we're travelling in 2019?
Oh, very disappointed, like every Melbourne supporter would be, in terms of coming into the year and having high expectations of us. The media wrote us up that we're going to be in the top 4 and playing off in the grand final before a ball was even kicked. So we all went into the season following on from last year's exciting finish, hoping that every game we go to, we're going to be in it and we're going to win most of them. And to have sitting at the halfway mark 3 and 9?
4 now. Yeah, we won our 4th on the weekend.
Yeah, 4 and 9. It's not what we expected, and I'm obviously a keen follower of the D's, and I go as many times as I can. And I still think we've got the players to be able to get there. It's just out of a lot of players, too many players out of form compared to last year at the end when we had everybody up and about, fit, playing really well. We've just got to get everybody back to being fit and in good form, and we've got a team there that can obviously take us deep into September, as was proven last year. This year, we're still got a chance, but we've got to win nearly every game, I think. To do that, that's going to be very difficult, but you never know. Just like to go and see the players playing well. Going back 5-6 years ago when you went to the footy and, it just wasn't, you could see that their competitiveness wasn't up to the level of league footy, and it was really disappointing. So you'd end up watching a quarter and then basically it became a social event, and you'd go back in the bar and just have a chat with some past players or supporters. But now, I go to the footy wanting to sit out and watch them turn it on for us.
Well, you did experience in 1987 having to win all the remaining games about midway through the year, so it can be done. It's mathematically possible, but it's a tough ask. Balls, we see you on social media, a lot of functions and activities put on by the Melbourne Football Club Past Players and Officials Association. You're chairman of that organisation. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and its importance to the club and the past players?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for the opportunity here. It's certainly something that the Melbourne Footy Club has been a big part of my life, and a lot of the past players and players that I didn't necessarily play with, I still feel like that I know them. They're friends of mine, and basically what we do as an association is it's all about benevolence and togetherness. So benevolence, we want to be able to be there to help them out, help past players out when they fall on hard times, or if they require some support around injuries or anything like that, that we're able to financially help them out in that area. And then on the togetherness side, we hold a couple of match day functions a year where we extend an invite out to all of our members, past players and officials, that can bring along their friends, their family, their kids. We get a nice safe room where we can have some finger food and we get reserved seats. So we normally hold 3 or 4 of those a year. We've got 2 more to go, round 20 against Richmond and round 22 against the Swans. And the two that we've had earlier this year was round 1 and round 10, and we've had over 100 people in the room at both times for those events. So they're a really good social catch up for family and friends of our past players and officials. And then we have our reunion, an annual reunion we hold on the Thursday before the grand final in the Jim Steins room. We get players come from interstate to attend that one because they come for the grand final on the Saturday, so they come early. And it's great to see guys from Perth and Adelaide and Tassie come and catch up with their and even the country guys coming down to catch up. So my role in all of that is just basically trying to get as much support and assistance around past players that need it. And from a social point of view, there's nothing better than catching up and talking about old times.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We love seeing it on social media. I saw you guys went up to the Northern Territory this year, so it was great. I think they showed on TV a few of you guys in the stand. It was really great to see.
Yep.
Balls, I want to thank you for your time tonight. I love that we can follow you and the players from our childhoods and teenage years and seeing what you're up to these days on social media. I think it's fantastic that many of you still have a passion for the Ds, and you just mentioned you're chairman of the Past Players Association, and I'd love to have access to that Rolodex to book guests on this podcast. Just kidding.
Yep. No, look, any time we've obviously hooked up to get this happening tonight. So let's keep in touch. If there's anyone you need or you would like to get in touch with to have a chat with, I'm sure they'll all be more than willing, and I'm happy to be the link between that. And I thank you for inviting me on. It's terrific. I love what you guys are doing for us.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm going to take you up on that one.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Very generous with your time.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And yes, that was Rodney Grinter. Thank you.
Good on you, Andy. Good on you, Jace. Go Ds.
Go Ds.